Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Newcastle Noir 2020, our mini online festival, to the Saturday night spotlight. Now, as many of you will have seen with regarding to the publicity, this evening's panel was meant to have two fabulous authors who have developed the police procedural for our contemporary crime fiction in such a wonderful way. Authors who have created, especially their female protagonist, male protagonists as well, but their female protagonists who we have taken to our heart. Sadly, we are not able to be in conversation with Mary Hannah this evening. She is such a favourite here in the Northeast and far, far beyond. Come to love and admire the work that Mary has created since publishing The Murder Wall in 2010. We live in very sad times, and unfortunately, due to a family bereavement, Mary is unable to be with us this evening, and she is sorely missed. Mary, from everyone on the Newcastle Noir team, we send you our love and our deepest condolences, and look forward to the time when we can return once again to be in conversation together. We miss you, Mary, and send you much love. So, welcome back, everyone, to our Saturday evening spotlight. Again, I just want to thank people that have been with us since we've been doing our mini Newcastle Noir 2020, keeping the spirit alive while the virus is keeping us in lockdown. And as I've been saying, I hope if you are able and we are able to be back in the flesh, as it were, next year for 2021, that you will come to Newcastle and experience these conversations and so many more actually together. Hope you are all well and safe and enjoying a Saturday evening full of criminal discussion. So, as I said yesterday evening, it was really important for us that we had a fab lineup, and our spotlights were just some authors who I am really, really excited about at the minute, to think that they are providing us with the most amazing crime fiction, award-winning authors. And this Saturday evening, you know, is no exception. It is my great pleasure and privilege to introduce to you a award-winning Sunday Times bestseller and an author that I have never had the pleasure of interviewing, so it's double the pleasure tonight. Please, everybody, if you will, welcome Jane Casey to the Zoom meeting. Hi, Jane.
Hi, it's lovely to be here. It's not how I was expecting my first time at Newcastle Noir to go, but I'm just happy to be here.
Oh, we're thrilled that we've been able to do this with you. And again, as I've been asking authors, you will, if possible, come back next year, won't you?
I would say try and stop me, Jackie. Like, I will turn up whether I'm invited or not. I'll just be at every event.
Awesome. Bless you, Jane. Thank you for that. Now, I had the wonderful fortune to be in the audience at Bloody Scotland last year and listen to you in conversation there. And that's what made me think, oh, please, you know, I wonder if Jane would be able to come. And then, because there are so many books to read, and I must confess, I'm really sorry that I came late to the party with Maeve Kerrigan. All right, you must forgive me.
It doesn't matter when people come, as long as they come.
And honestly, an utterly thrilling ride that you provide. And I'm going to ask you about her. I'm going to ask you about your books and about your latest book, The Cutting Place, that is, yeah. And ask you about the awards as well that you've won, the Mary Higgins Clark Award, and also the Irish Book Awards, isn't it, that you won at?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, the Irish
yeah.
Book Awards, they're sponsored by different people, so they change their acronym every now and then.
Yeah.
But it is the National Book Awards.
The National Book Awards, fabulous, fabulous. So, I wonder if you wouldn't mind. It's going to sound a bit weird if we can start now and then go back in time. But I see the book behind you, The Cutting Place. There, yeah, yeah, and a book released in a time of, well, not cholera, but in a time of virus. Could you first of all tell us how different it's been releasing this book? You know, because it's not the ninth. It's the ninth
in the Maeve Kerrigan series, and
That's
it's
right.
the 10th one for adults that I've done.
That's right. And then I know you have a young adult series as well that later I'd like to ask you a little bit about, if that's okay. Sorry, I have so many questions. So if you feel a little bit grilled by this, I hope it's not too fierce. But so this ninth book in the series, how did it feel different from releasing other books?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad that it actually came out when it was scheduled to come out. I know a lot of people have had their books move and have had their publishing schedule change completely. And I was just really happy that they were able to bring it out when it was supposed to come out, and that people could read it when they were expecting to read it. It actually came out about 2 weeks early in ebook and audiobook. And during that time, I had so many people say, oh, it was such a relief to get to read something that took my mind off everything else that's going on. So it came out around the beginning of April. I think that was a really dark and difficult time, and there was a lot of uncertainty about, I mean, there still is a lot of uncertainty, but it was particularly new to us all, I think, and nobody really knew what was happening. So actually it was very comforting for me to feel that life was going on and that people were reading and listening to the book, and I had like a captive audience. So and that really helped. I think people didn't have a lot of other distractions, or they were looking for something to take themselves away from the real world. And from what I can tell from the feedback that I've had from readers, that was a real advantage actually, just to have it come out then. It's been weird from the point of view of publicity and talking to people and doing events. I had a really packed year. My diary was it had loads and loads of exciting things in it, all of which have either gone or turned into video chats like this. But actually I've come to love the video chats. I really like it, and I'm really glad that we can do something and talk about books in the way that we would ordinarily at festivals. So the publicity has kind of gone on and on, whereas before, I think usually a book comes out and you have a couple of really busy weeks and then that's it. And I've been talking about this book for a couple of weeks, and I'll be talking about it for a couple of weeks more, and I just hope people don't get bored.
Yeah, I'm sure. Do you know, I think it's interesting, isn't it, how we are learning to be more creative, with it, how we reach readers, how we reach those who love, our books. Say your books, not my books, I don't write, but that the sense that we don't have to be apart, that we can still find each other. And talking to some other people recently and saying, some of us take very much for granted the ability to be together in a physical space and enjoy our conversations around books and aspects of publishing. But before the virus, there were people who would never have been able to attend a festival, a book launch, for various different reasons. And now many of those people are actually now able to engage.
Yeah, it feels like an opening up in a really positive way. I totally agree. I don't think anything will ever compare to a live event.
Mhm.
It's the electricity of sitting in front of a group of people,
Mhm.
and you never know what's going to come out in a
Mhm.
discussion like that. And I think I'm looking forward to going back to it. I
Mhm.
really am. I'm looking forward to, I suppose it will be a sign that life has got back to normal.
Mhm.
But I love the fact, I think we should do more video. I think we should film more events, and we should make them more available to people who can't, for whatever reason, come and see them. So yeah, I
Mhm.
completely agree.
Definitely, and the notion as well of, if the planet, has been speaking to us, and that idea of, we love to gather together internationally. It's really important for me at the festival to bring people from around the world, but maybe, again, doing it like this, beaming people in, will be a new, like a blended way of meeting together.
I think, yeah, I mean, like, authors are not the quickest to adapt, I would say, in a massive sweeping statement about all of us. But I think, like, this has been a really, really difficult learning curve for some of us, including me. And just making sort of that adjustment in your head that you're going to do it this way is a whole new thing. But it's been a very positive kind of development for all of this.
Totally. Now, I was reading some of the quotes that you've given and things that you say, and I want to look at this whole series, this gorgeous body of work that is the Maeve Kerrigan series. And if I may quote you, all my criminal elements have some basis in reality. And wow, if that's true, because I read The Cutting Place and I did a brief look back at the series, and that's some catalogue of grimness that, that you have there. And so I wonder, could you, for anybody who's unfamiliar with your work and how you can speak to those criminal elements, do you want to give us a little bit of background to you and your writing?
Well, I was a children's books editor in my past life, which is not actually great preparation for writing crime fiction or for writing. You expect people to have a slightly more hard edge background, and I think people are always surprised when they meet me, because I don't come across as the kind of person who kills and kills again. But actually, that is what happens in the books. They're fairly, like, the body count creeps up there. Some of them are like almost Shakespearean by the end. You're looking around thinking, actually, who did I leave alive? But I think it helps that my husband is a criminal barrister. So that is, like, I would say 10% of what goes into it. It's not as much as people probably imagine. Very luckily for me, he's obsessed with crime and with everything to do with crime, and always has been, from when I met him first. And so we have always really engaged with policing and with that kind of world. And he is also a special constable in Surrey Police.
Okay.
So he actually goes out and does response policing. You dial 999 and he might actually turn up at your door and sort of be like a proper police officer. And it's fascinating talking to him about the things that we as civilians maybe don't understand, or the assumptions that we have because of TV and film. And TV and film use a lot of shortcuts. Books do as well, but not quite as much as TV and film. And I try to stay within touching distance of what actually happens in the real world. I won't necessarily do exactly what it is, but I know I can ask him, and if he doesn't know, he'll know someone who knows.
He can ask them. Yeah.
And that is a huge help.
I wonder if I may, and not getting too personal, but had you begun to write this series before you met your husband?
No, I had I actually, the first book that I wrote, it was that classic thing of always having read crime fiction and always having loved it and having a story, and then realizing halfway through that actually I was writing a crime novel without actually, I hadn't really sat down and thought, right, I'm going to be a crime novelist. But the stories that I enjoyed
Yeah.
were crime novels, and the ones that I always think, if you're writing, then you should be writing the book that you want to read. That's like the not the book that you think will sell, but the one that you just want to bring into existence. And then you have the passion to do it and the commitment, and you're the only person who can make this happen. So that's my starting point. And it really had nothing to do with him and his various jobs and things. I'm not sure I would have had the nerve to write a police procedural series necessarily if I hadn't had access to that world through him, because it's quite daunting. There are amazing people out there. There are lots of retired police officers who spend their time fielding stupid questions from people like me who are writing stories. I actually think it's easier sometimes if you're not a police officer to see the glamour in it and the excitement, and they, I think, sometimes get a bit worn out by it. And actually to turn it into something really exciting for readers is quite challenging for them. Whereas someone like me, I still get excited. I still, every time a police car goes past with the lights on, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
So,
and I think as well, writing crime fiction, I love the distinction that you make between, the everyday lived experience and the notion of what we read on the page or what we see on the screen regarding fiction. It's not documentary. And I know you must be careful to get details and things right, but I do like the fact that there is scope. I wanted to ask, have you and he ever argued about a plot detail that you were desperate to get in and that he was just saying, you can't do this?
Oh yeah, definitely. But I mean, once he said that would never happen, then for me it's tainted. So it doesn't matter how much I argue or really want to have it in there. I would still be like, okay, no, it's ruined now. I can't do that. In my first book that I ever wrote, I had a very, very dramatic scene that was police officers kind of haranguing someone in an interview. And he read it and he said, well, this would never happen because this would be a transcript that would be read out in court. So they would have to read out everything that they're saying to this woman. And so they wouldn't be saying these things because they would get in trouble, basically. This is very formal, and they'll have to answer to a judge eventually if this goes to trial. So no, this would never happen this way. And it was really upsetting because I had written this amazingly powerful and everybody was very angry and there was lots of shouting going on. And that hurt a little bit. I mean, that must be 12 years ago. I still remember it. I feel more
scarred. Yeah.
But actually, it's funny because he sometimes will come back and tell me a story, not from his experience, but he works with a lot of police officers in his legal life, and they know he's interested. They will tell him interesting things that have happened to them. And sometimes I will take a detail from one of those anecdotes. I try not to take stuff directly from life. I think it's disrespectful, for one thing.
Of course, yeah.
People, and also because it doesn't tend to sit very well within a fictional narrative. So it always kind of, it doesn't blend into the background the way that you would want it to. It doesn't feel as seamless, to me anyway, in my own work, when I know I've taken something from real life. But every now and then there's like a detail or something, or something that's just too good. I can't leave it out. And those are always the ones, the bits that my editor will say, I think this is a bit too far-fetched. I just don't think the readers would believe this happened. And it's always the stuff that happened in real life, always.
It's wonderful. And do you know what I think? Again, looking at what people have said about your writing, and I think it's wonderful, testimony to the way that you write. People say, this is just, readers find your work so credible. That sense of they are in something that could so readily be happening. Your police officers aren't, superhuman. The issues that you broach, and I'd like to talk about a couple of them, are really what readers sadly have either experienced or will know about. Again, I'm talking about the chronicles of our time, as it were. And if we can come just back a little bit to the cutting place for a minute, if you don't mind, the idea of investigating a gruesome murder and it leading to that elite club in London. Is it Chiron?
The Chiron Club.
The Chiron Club. Yeah. I wondered, did you run into any difficulty when researching this? If anybody said to you, I'm sorry, did you get too close?
To talk about this. No, I think a lot of the details of the Chiron Club are completely invented. And, you know, some of the, I grew up in Ireland, I grew up in Dublin, and there are some very respectable gentlemen's clubs in the centre of town. They are, you know, they're very kind of old school and traditional. And my father, who is an old school and traditional kind of man, used to take us to Sunday lunch there sometimes in his club or in one of the other ones in the area. And in some ways, the background, I was very familiar with that background. And also I went to Oxford, which I have to say is not what people assume it is, but there is a tiny element that is exactly what people assume it is and plays up to that. And I remember seeing the Bullingdon Club members. So the Bullingdon Club is famously, it's the very snobbish and overprivileged group of young men who David Cameron was a member, Boris Johnson was a member, all of the people who are currently in power basically, or have been in the last sort of 10 or 15 years, were heavily involved in this kind of very privileged world where you went seamlessly from, you know, maybe Eton to Oxford to this very cozy little group of badly behaved people, and then on to sort of find your destiny in running the world. And I think that was something that I really wanted to kind of look at and play with, and because it's not real life, you can push that little bit further. So they're even more sinister than maybe the twits who were dressing up and wandering around Oxford and thinking that they were amazing and wonderful and just generally being despised by everyone else in the university, but they did think that they were very, very special. So all of that kind of fed into what I ended up writing. And all of the kind of, you know, it's probably the most political book that I've ever written. And just the more things that come out, the more stories that I read about what's gone on in the last, particularly since 2016.
Indeed.
The more I think, you know, you can see that there are conspiracies or there are things going on under the surface that ordinary people don't know anything about. And that, you know, we're all manipulated to some extent by anybody in politics. Like you know, I'm not saying
yes, regardless of color, of ideology,
what they're trying to push. You know, I think like probably last year, if you were having this conversation, we'd have been talking about Brexit because that was the big story that, you know, everybody was obsessed with. But there again, both sides of that, everybody has an agenda, and when you bring that into fiction and you make that agenda to be number one, to be the most influential, and to do whatever it takes to be the most influential group of people, then you can really have some fun.
Yeah, indeed, and you do. And what I love as well, I mean, I really appreciate the points that you were just raising there. I think very often, you know, even those of us that are extremely engaged with what might be happening around certain issues, there comes a time when you just think, you know, I can't watch anymore, I can't read anymore. But I think, you know, good crime fiction allows us to again contemplate this serious stuff from a very safe space. In a way, it's okay, we're not being lectured to, we're not being told how we should feel, but it just keeps these things ticking. So I wanted to say thank you to you, because, you know, I love to see these issues raised, and it's not on, you know, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, whenever o'clock news. And so you know, it was good. And again, you know, the idea that there's also, you know, domestic violence, the notion of migration. You know, you don't shy away from looking at these tricky issues.
I think like one of the things about crime is that it is so much quicker to respond to things that are happening in society than maybe other genres are. I feel like the literary novelists need a little bit longer to sit with an idea or a kind of a change that has come upon us. And crime fiction tends to be very, very quick in taking something that's happening in real life and moving it into fiction and playing around with it and seeing how it changes. So, you know, one of the things about The Cutting Place is that it begins with the discovery of a dismembered body in the Thames, which is very grim. And the body belongs to a freelance journalist, a young freelance journalist. And I had realized, I read a lot about a Swedish journalist who was killed. She was murdered, I think, in 2017.
Yes, is that the woman in the submarine?
The woman in the submarine.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to write about her. I think it's such a tragic story. She had gone to do this interview with this man who had a submarine. And when she was on the submarine and had no way of escaping, he then murdered her for his own reasons, which he's never admitted or talked about, but he has been convicted. But what struck me about it was, because she was freelance, she had to go and get that story herself. So she had to go and do the research and do the interviews and then put the story together. And then, having taken all the risk involved, she then sold, you know, her plan was to sell the story to some news media organization. Whereas before, in the old days of the news, she would have had an editor. She would have been working for a particular newspaper. She wouldn't have been on her own. And the great digital democratization of media has meant that people are no longer sort of employing journalists. Everybody is freelance. Everybody's on their own. And it occurred to me that for women, suddenly being an investigative journalist, which has always been difficult. I mean, I trained as a journalist for a year and then decided that it wasn't going to be for me because I don't really like asking people difficult questions. I get embarrassed. I have to back away. So then I realized I was going to be the worst journalist ever if I persevered with it. But it's really hard for women to be taken seriously as investigative journalists. Then if you add in the fact that it's suddenly more dangerous for them to do it, that's sort of an extra disincentive and maybe driving them towards more, you know, ladylike things that aren't threatening or difficult. And these are the little kind of unintended consequences that always hook my attention. So something you would not think that because freelance journalism is on the rise that there's a knock-on effect for women that is very negative, but actually that is the case. So that's what I wanted to write about in one of the things that I wanted to write about in The Cutting Place.
It's wonderful, because as you say, what does it mean? How do changes affect people and certain groups that maybe don't affect other groups in the same way?
And where does risk come from in our society?
Yeah, and because initially when I was reading and the you know, and the dismembered body and thinking, you know, crime written on the female body, that typical, but actually you're doing something beyond that, you know, and
so.
Yeah, definitely, and raising those issues. I wonder though, coming back to a point that you mentioned about your own life experience and being a student at Oxford, and I think I read you studied literature.
Yes.
And I wonder, the literature that you studied at Oxford and what you're writing now, presumably, not unless did you study crime fiction at Oxford?
Not officially, but yes. I used to hide in the Bodleian Library basically from my essays, and I would order up particularly Elizabeth George novels. Those were kind of what I was reading at the time, and I would order them up from the stacks and sit. The Bodleian is a copyright library, so they have everything, and I would just sit and read my extremely enthralling novel, and then kind of think, oh God, I really have to write this thing about Middle English that I'm not that bothered about. And I didn't realize at the time that it was I was feeding my interest in something that would later be really useful to me. But this is why I feel no reading is ever wasted.
Exactly. I think it's marvelous that maybe in the context, and of course the idea of how a genre is viewed, because everybody has a right to their opinion, but to think maybe in a space where crime fiction wasn't necessarily considered good fiction, to then, here we are so many, X number of years later, and, and you have honed a craft that is, maybe it wasn't so bad not to be writing those essays.
I think so. I remember I got a really terrible mark on a critical theory essay that I wrote, where I wrote quite a lot about Ruth Rendell and how she had her Barbara Vine persona, and what the difference was, like why readers would respond differently to one, or why, their expectations would be different. And really the tutor just hated it and gave me a terrible mark. But I still, I found it fascinating. That's what I wanted to write about. So yeah, obviously all these things were percolating in my head all the time, even when I was supposed to be thinking about other things.
Beautiful. Now, your first publication is The Missing, yeah?
That's right. Yep.
And that's a standalone, yeah?
Yes.
But I wonder, when did Maeve become someone that you felt you wanted to write about? Where did she sort of like pop up in your imagination?
I was asked to come up with a series character. So my editor at the time told me quite truthfully that people never remember authors, and they never remember author names, but they do remember characters. Which, I think that's the best thing that you can know as an author, that you're not really that important. Mostly people will be very focused on the person you're writing about, if you get it right, to the point where people will sometimes tell me what Maeve would do, or they have a very strong idea in their head of her, and it is totally independent of me. I didn't realize I would still be writing her 10 years down the line. So that is one thing. I don't know whether I think I've been very lucky to get to keep going with this character in this series, and I've definitely got a huge amount out of coming back to her so often. But when I started writing her, I just really wanted to write about a young woman who was finding her feet in a very intimidating environment. And at the time, I don't think there were that many crime novels about junior members of a murder investigation, as opposed to, like, we're very used to seeing the chief inspector being at the heart of a crime novel, or at least somebody who is in charge, and maybe an imposing figure, a man, somebody who is able to win a fight if he's in a fight. All of those things that were they're very satisfying and really enjoyable to read. And I wanted to write somebody who didn't have those advantages and had massive disadvantages, because she's attractive, and therefore anything that she says she has to say it twice as loud as anyone else, or to be taken seriously, she has to overcome so much. And so the first books are really all about her kind of navigating her way through the world and trying to decide when it's okay for her to use her attributes, like the fact that men respond to her in a certain way, or should she hold that back? All these things that I think male characters would never ever think about, but to me fascinating. And so I really just wanted to write about this person who has an Irish background, who's living in London, who is an outsider in multiple ways, in terms of not being part of the team, not sort of fitting in quite the way that everybody else does automatically. The police is a very patriarchal environment. It's a very formal environment. And just playing around with that, and how she related to other members of the team. And really, she kind of crept up on me a little bit, because by the end of writing the first book in the series, which is The Burning, I really liked her. And I was really excited about coming back to write about her again. But I think the first book in the series is not typical of the rest of the series in some ways. So I sort of feel I'm very fond of it, but I would, in some ways, love to go back and write it again, knowing what I know now, with the benefit of, 9 books.
Would you ever be tempted, as with many a film series or TV series, could there be the possibility of a prequel?
I mean, it's because she starts so young. That's the
Yeah.
difficulty, because she doesn't have a huge amount of as a detective constable, she's come up quite quickly to be a detective, and that's been her focus all the way through. I think this isn't something that we civilians don't always realize, but like police officers, a lot of them would never want to be a detective and would run a mile from it, and it's not their career path. And you can be a PC your entire career and have a great career, and actually being promoted and being a detective is not necessarily what drives a lot of them, but it does drive her. And so she just doesn't have a lot of space to have sort of a prequel. But I would like to write about response officers at some point. Like, I think that's a world that hasn't really been touched as much. It hasn't been dealt with as much. And, part of the problem is that they tend to deal with something quickly and then move on. And they don't see it through the way that you can with a murder investigation. But I'm sure there's a way.
I'm sure. And again, especially because given the way that you develop those characters, that again, it's the characters time and time again. I mean, the plot lines are fabulous, but people want to know what is happening to these characters. So I think there's a possibility with that putative series there. I have to ask this, and I hope you don't mind, because I'm sure you're asked it time and time again. But the Maeve Josh dynamic, and without giving anything away in case people haven't read The Cutting Place, and to be more sort of like technical about this, the to date or not to date, that dynamic between them. I mean, do you honestly think, where it stands now, without taking into account this book, do you honestly think that they are two people that could happily be together? Or if they ever were to get together, would this just not be problematic?
I mean, problematic is good from my point of view. Happy ever after is the ending. So that's no good for me. I don't know. I try and be really true to the characters. I think they've changed over time. Josh has certainly changed. He's mellowed massively from where he arrived. I don't know how much people know about this, but he was only supposed to be in the second book in the series. So he was a kind of a throwaway character for me at that point. He is really obnoxious when he turns up, like really, really obnoxious and sexist and awful, to the point that he's actually kind of a suspect at times in the book, that you're not really sure of what's motivating him. And the thing I think with him is that the more you find out, the more I find out about him, the more you kind of understand that what on the surface is abrasive and horrible is actually something very different. And that's what's fun for me, is kind of peeling it back a little bit more with each book, and putting him through difficult situations and seeing how he responds, and what he's prepared to give the readers and to give Maeve, to how far he's prepared to go. So Maeve is a very open character, and he's very closed off, and so they're really fun to write.
They are, and I love what you say about Josh, that the way that a character that initially the readers may not have taken to, and yet here we are now, X number of books down the line, and him being a character, that I've seen people's comments of saying, but Josh, it's like, they're in his corner now, and it's beautiful the way that through your writing, we spoke about political manipulation before, but I think this is very positive, the way that the power of writing to get us to change our point of view. Beautiful.
Well, it's a tricky thing to do. I mean, like, I think there's a character in the last couple of books called Georgia Shaw. She's kind of an up and coming. She's sort of Maeve 5 years ago, but she's not her. She's not a great police officer. She takes shortcuts, and she's always trying to kind of get attention, and she does everything the way that Maeve wouldn't, basically, is how I kind of think of her. And I think my next challenge is going to be making people like her, because the rudeness of people about her, and people feel really strongly about her. But I don't, like, as a writer, I think it's really important that you respect all your characters and that you like them, even for all their flaws, because I think you can always tell when a writer is writing a character who they don't like or who they despise. And it comes through, and it makes me feel really uneasy. And I always, like, no matter how awful my characters are, I try and find something, like, I care about them all, and I want that to come through in the writing. And I think that that's why people respond to them so strongly.
It's beautiful. Oh yeah, you care about them. Yeah, yeah. Even though they can be extremely infuriating, and yeah. Now, so thinking about process and developing characters, and maybe authors who write characters that they're not engaged with, I wondered about asking you, because again, you've been an editor as well, and it seems a good point in where the world is at to talk about the process of writing a book, and how at the moment, or up to now, it's been very much the notion of a book a year. And I don't necessarily mean for you, but that cycle that seems to be. Do you think it's healthy, and is it possible to do that thing of a book a year? And do you think we might see things change because of what we're going through?
I mean, I think readers, when you get to the point that I'm at, which is really lovely, like, there are quite a few people who wait for the book to come out. And when they read the book, the first thing they say is, I can't believe I have another year to wait to find out what happens next. So I think there's a pressure. I think it's the box set kind of mentality, where you can binge watch something on TV, and you can just sit, and most things you don't have to wait a week to watch the next episode. It automatically happens for you. And I think publishing, there are some people who are able to write more, and who are writing to that kind of readership that just wants another book that they know they'll enjoy, which I love, but I would rather that they were reading 10 writers. I like to share the books that I love, and I like to persuade people to try someone that they haven't read before. And I'm a big book pusher. that's what I do. And I get really excited when I read something. I think that's the editor in me, that I get excited when I read someone that I haven't read before, and I love them, and I just want everyone else to read them as well. I think a book a year is about right. I think if you're allowed to have a couple of years, it will take you a couple of years to write a book. If you are allowed 5 years, then it will definitely take you 5 years.
5 years, yeah.
So I think having a deadline, having that rhythm to your year, where the book is coming out at this point, and you should have finished the other book that you were working on by then, and it just keeps you ticking over in a way. What is going to happen now is a mystery to everyone, I think, especially because so many books have moved to next year.
Yes.
So I think it will take us a long time to sort of shake down all of the upheaval of the last couple of months. But readers are readers.
Exactly. I think in all this, there is, and I've said this to other authors that I've been speaking to, conversations for this weekend, that there is no doubt that whatever happens, we love stories. It's an innate part of human nature to tell our stories and create stories. So, if we're having to do it a different way, we'll find a way to do it, because
absolutely. And I'm very moved by so many of the independent bookshops who are going to so much trouble to send out books, and to they are an essential to me and to a lot of other people. And it would be absolutely unbearable not to have them in this time. And there's something very consoling, but it's like one person going in and stuffing envelopes and sending stuff out. That's a lot. That's a big effort that they're making. So I hope one of the positives of this is that people appreciate where we get our books from as much as getting the books themselves.
Exactly. Yeah, I wonder, it would be a beautiful moment if you'll allow me to give a shout out to Forum Books in Corbridge, who would normally be, you know, catering the festival, you know, and would be having you sign your books there, and we'd be buying them. And again, yeah, you know, may our independent bookstores come out of this, you know, that we honor them, and we keep buying our books with them. It's so important, because those spaces, you know, are so important as well, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, there is no substitute for going into a really good bookshop where people love the books, having a conversation with a proper bookseller. And you know, you can just, it's like going on a round the world trip, but you only stand in one place in a shop.
Yeah. Or the notion of as a child going into the sweetie shop, and they're all there and you can choose. Now, I said earlier that I would want to ask you about the other series that you've written, the Jess Tennant series, a young adult series. Why did you want to do this? And who is Jess, for any of us who haven't managed to be in that series? Why and who?
So I had been a children's books editor, and this was sort of like the last ambition that I had to do with that. I was really lucky, and I got to work with some amazing authors, particularly for teenagers. Particularly, I mentioned Frances Harding, who's the most phenomenal author, and really inventive and creative, and since then has been much more recognized and celebrated, as she should be. But I really wanted to write something myself for that readership, because I think there's something so immediate about teen fiction. Like, it's like the difference between a pop song and a symphony. A pop song can really make you, like, it gets you in a very short space of time, and you feel something when you listen to it, and you've got 3 minutes and it hits you and you never forget it, and you listen to it a million times and you never get tired of it. And that, to me, is the best of teen fiction, and that's what I wanted to do with the Jess Tennant series. It is going back quite a long time now, because I wrote them, I mean, I think the last one I wrote about 8 years ago, and I haven't gone back to them because I think teen fiction is a very sophisticated market. Like, the readers they really know what they want and what they want to read. And I felt like I didn't necessarily have something that I needed to tell them. There were other people who deserved that slot, if you like. So I kind of backed away from it. But Jess is, it's the classic thing of the girl coming to town to, she moves to a little town in Devon where her mother is from, and she's the new girl, and it's her sort of finding out what all the secrets are in this very kind of glamorous and privileged little enclave on the south coast. So it was so much fun to write.
Yeah.
But they were really like, it was almost like, this is a career path that I could have taken. And then I came back to adult crime. I felt happier writing adult crime. So.
But is it not just sometimes, you know, you think of artists, other types of creative, there's a moment for doing something, that there's a vein in there that needs to be tapped and come out, and that's fine. And maybe you never return to Jess, but she's there.
She exists. I mean, this is the thing. I always think that, like, authors have this kind of comet's tail of invisible characters standing behind them, waiting to be written about. Just, you know, they keep turning up and going, when are you writing my book?
Excuse me, hello, yeah.
I've been waiting. You thought of me 7 years ago, and you've never written a word about me. And I kind of think, I'll get to you. Don't worry, I'll get to you.
Yeah, I've got my hands full with this lot. I can't. Yeah.
It's funny. Like, there are characters that I really want to write, and it's that thing of, you know, you have a certain amount of time, you have a certain number of commitments, and you have to really justify taking the time to do something, to write something else. But it's so good for you.
I can't wait to see either. You know, if certain characters come out in the Maeve series, or if you know, these characters are actually, you know, or in their own right need to come out, and you write something else. You know, watch this space. I wanted to come back to the notion of you having been an editor. Do you still work as an editor, or are you full-time now with your writing?
I'm a full-time author. I'm very privileged. I get to do it all the time. No, I have left editing behind me. It's great sorrow.
I wondered if, though, as you write, is there ever the editor within you, sort of talking to you, or do you leave your editing to somebody else?
I mean, Jackie, if you saw my first drafts, they look like final books because I'm obsessive about making everything as perfect as I can. Like there's never a misprint. When I say this, I hope there's never a misprint. Everything looks very finished. And actually it takes a really good editor to come in and pull something like that apart and say, this is how you need to fix it. And they always do. I've been really lucky with my editors. They are prepared to kind of smash the whole thing and come back and say, this doesn't work, or you need more of this. And I just think you can't do it for yourself. You can try, you can plan, you can do your best. It's like I always think of it as being like, your chapter plan or your outline is like a map. And then you plunge into the forest and you're looking at the map and the path is ahead of you, but actually there are roads off it that you weren't expecting, and things happen, and was there a river there? It's not marked on the map. And you can get lost really easily in a book. I think it has always happened to me at some point in every book that I've written, and until you get to the end and look back, you don't know where you are. And actually having an editor come in at that point and say, look, this path you chose was stupid, is really helpful and really good. And it's quite a scary feeling when you think like you're lost in your own world created.
Yeah, you've gone down a certain way. But I wanted to say that in this most recent book, in The Cutting Place, there are certain things that come about, and again, not saying what they are, there's certain things that come about that were actually hinted at. If people have been following the series, they were hinted at in other books. And I had visions of you with maybe, those little page post-it notes in previous books, thinking, can bring that back later, or can resolve this. Do you do that? Do you have those highlight moments that you think, yes, that will come later on?
I think sometimes I put things in and I don't know why I've put them in. And they're I think there are lots of loose threads that you can pull on and come out with a story later in the series, without ever, I don't want to pretend that I am all seeing, all knowing from the very beginning. But there are events in The Cutting Place that refer back to a book from about 5 years ago, particularly, specifically. But you don't need to know what they are to kind of understand in The Cutting Place how it comes about. And there are also, there's one character that's been in a couple of the books that in The Cutting Place really shows his true colors. And when he appeared in the first place, I was a little bit, I don't know, I was writing him one way and thinking of him another way. And I think that kind of ambivalence has been really useful in this book, but I didn't know that it was going to happen that way. So I hadn't quite got that far in my head. But I think some part of my brain is looking out for me and is planning the whole. I wish I would type faster.
I have a couple of questions that people have sent in. Of course, normally we don't open this up to the audience, but if you'll allow me. So the first question is from Kay Walker from Newcastle, and she asked, when you first saw your first book in a bookshop on the shelf, how did you feel? And if somebody was looking at that book at the same time, were you tempted, or did you say, I highly recommend that book?
I think the first book came out, I had, like, with the timing of things being what it always is in life, I got my first book deal the day I found out I was pregnant with my first child. So everything sort of happened at the same time. And I was on maternity leave when the first book came out. And I hadn't slept for about 6 months. And I was literally hadn't slept. He was a shocker. And I was trying to finish The Burning, the book that became The Burning. And I was late with delivering it. They did 2 in the first year. They published 2 in 2010. So they published The Missing in February, I think, and then The Burning in October of that year. And so I was really under pressure. And I remember just feeling it was the most surreal thing, and almost like being shocked to see that it had happened and that it was there, because there was so much else going on and I was so stressed. And The Missing did really well. Like it sold far better than I think they were expecting it to, and it still sells, which I find really I don't know, there's something, it doesn't sell as well as the series does, but it kind of ticks over. There's still people reading it, and I find that very very pleasing, to think that people are still coming to it 10 years on. But anytime that I've ever leaned over and said to someone, I wrote that book, or would you like me to sign a copy for you? I always feel really embarrassed, and I always feel like I've kind of forced them into buying it, and maybe they were just moving it out of the way, or they had read the back of the book and thought, oh no, definitely not. so no, I'm not likely to kind of go, have you read this person? I know they're really good.
I know this author, I've read this book, they're really nice. Love this one. I wonder if ever when you did that, if anybody's ever responded and gone, nah, you're fine.
Yeah, I'm not really, no, not my kind of thing. No, that's the fear. That is my absolute fear. So even when I've literally bought the book, I always feel like, but did you look at the other books in the shop? There's so many.
Are you sure? Yeah, are you sure? But thank you for that, and thank you, Kay from Newcastle.
Great questions.
It was lovely, wasn't it? I was grateful that the people have sent these in. I have another one as well that I'm actually using with various authors that are at the festival, this mini festival, because I think it's fabulous and it's so fitting for the moment. And this is from Susan Heads, who's based in Newcastle, but she writes the Book Trail blog. It's great. So she does this thing that, you've written a book and it may be set somewhere, and she'll take you on a journey around the places if it's set in a real place. It's lovely. She does. And she's been asking, if right now you have to choose one of your characters, and it doesn't necessarily need to be Maeve, it can be anybody in the series, who would you choose as the character to have with you in lockdown?
Ooh.
Yeah, and you're allowed to keep your family with you as well. It's not you have to substitute them for your family, but there'd be that extra person in the lockdown space. Who would it be and why?
Who would it be? I mean, I would be tempted to be locked down with Maeve, because I think she's quite chilled out and also quite resourceful. And she likes her own space, so I think she would probably want to, have shut herself away a bit, and we wouldn't have to be together all the time. I think Georgia Shaw, who nobody likes, would be a very good person to be locked down with. She would totally do a good manicure, which I can't. And I'm sure she can mix a mojito, so it depends on what, and I bet she's into karaoke. So if you wanted to have a fun time,
that could work. So you've got a possible choice. And the other side of the question is, of course, who would you definitely not want in there with you?
I mean, I don't think I could bear to be locked down with Josh Derwent. So I
Really?
love him, but I think it would be so stressful. Like, my husband is bad enough, so
two of them, no.
No, exactly. So I think that would probably be like my nightmare, being trapped. But I think we're all thinking about how we might address this in fiction. And while I'm not going to write anything about this situation specifically at any point, I have been thinking about writing something about Maeve and Derwent being in a situation where they can't leave.
That sounds very exciting. Now, I have one last question, and this is thinking about again the situation that we're in, not so much characters, but for you, Jane Casey, as you've been in lockdown, have you discovered something about yourself that you never knew, or something that's changed about you in these circumstances?
I think my sort of the things that matter to me are definitely changing. Like the things that I really, my priorities are sort of a lot clearer than maybe they were before. I, like, for me, and I think for a lot of authors, life hasn't changed a lot,
Yeah.
embarrassingly,
Yeah.
because we don't go out that much. We work alone. We are quite happy with our own company. And if anything, I've learned that I need my own space, and I need to be left alone for some part of the day. Like I need just peace for some part of the day. Otherwise I get really, even my beautiful family, I just, you know, they could just go somewhere else. That'd be fine by me. I haven't taken up needlework or any other hobby, which was like, I was thinking maybe this will be the time that I discover I'm really good with, you know, craft. It isn't.
No.
I'm not. And let's just not do that. But I definitely, you know, we had a very wonderful cat who died in February, and we don't have a pet at the moment, and we're all like lost souls because we don't have anything to kind of look after. So one of our priorities is to get a new pet as soon as possible.
As soon as possible. Yeah. Oh, Jane, I look forward to seeing if that pet is allowed upon social media, that you show us who joined the family after.
For sure. I think all social media will immediately be converted into like Pet Vision. It will just be 24/7.
Yeah. Never mind my books. Here's my pet. Yeah.
Buy my books so that the cat can eat.
Yes, I need to feed this cat. Oh, Jane, I'm really sorry that we're going to have to close the conversation. I still have questions to ask you, but
we can do that in real life.
We can. I really look forward to doing that. So again, thank you for being here on our mini virtual festival. Really appreciate it. I'm sure those people that have tuned in to watch have enjoyed, really, especially for people who haven't had a chance to read you, you know, to get to know you and start to talk about your characters. So thank you. And I look forward to seeing you as soon as possible.
I can't wait.
Okay. Bye. Bye.
Bye.